Some say there are beings out here, wandering the Irish countryside. They say that this world was never ours, that it belonged to them, long before we were ever here. Some leave them gifts and offerings. Disrespecting them will invite misfortune. Because these are not the fairies of Disney movies. They are the Aos Sí, and they can take any shape they need to get close to you. Your neighbour, your teacher, the person sitting right next to you.
The person sitting beside you could be one of them, and you wouldn't know it. That's what makes them frightening, because you might be them. You that are talking to me here today might be them, and I wouldn't know.
It's said that these supernatural beings are descended from the first tribes that inhabited Ireland, and that today they dwell in secrecy in hidden underground kingdoms in secluded parts of the countryside. These are the Fairies of Ireland, and they shape superstitions here to this day. Two and a half months and almost 2,000 kilometres on the road, we reached the Emerald Isle. We'd made it to Ireland. This was a moment we'd been looking forward to for weeks. A huge milestone. And after pedalling so far, finally arriving here almost didn't feel real. There is something enchanting about this country. Myths and legends have been shaped by its stunning landscape, and the air of superstition envelops Ireland in a blanket of mystery and magic. I've heard so many stories and fairy tales inspired by Ireland that being here was like stepping into the pages of one of them. It's easy to assume that belief in magic and fairies is a thing of the past. But here, it's alive and well, surviving through stories older than Ireland itself that have been passed down through generations, ever since the pagan religions dominated this part of the world.
I know plenty of people who might laugh, that's only nonsense. But scratch the surface a little bit and you'll find that the belief is still there. A lone white powder bush, you shouldn't interfere with it. To interfere with any fairy property, consequences would follow, and they wouldn't be good. And people left them alone. It was safer. And that is the case to the very present. I've heard, funny enough now, from old people where there was trouble with houses, divorces in houses, sudden deaths in families. What would they expect? Look where the house was built. There's my house, I'll do what I like. With my site, I bought it. Of course you don't. You don't. That might be where you paid money for, but that's not your site. That belongs to them, and always has belonged to them since this world began, and you're not going to take it off of them. The old people knew these things, which we don't. We ignored them, but you ignore those things at your cost.
Picture a fairy, and what do you see? A small, sparkly creature with elegant wings, maybe a wand, or a trail of glitter. But the fairies of Irish folklore are nothing like that. These fairies aren't good or evil, but are said to cause chaos and mischief when they're angry.
The fairy with the little wand and that and the little sparkly wings, that's only Walt Disney nonsense. But the fairies, as they were in real tradition, they could take any shape they like. And that's what makes them frightening. Because you might be them. You that are talking to me here today might be them, and I wouldn't know. I remember talking to an old man, and he told me he met them. And I said to him, "Just Mick, what do they look like?" And I can remember the way he paused. I remember the way he looked into his fireplace. And he said to me, "The person sitting beside you could be one of them," he said, "and you wouldn't know it." And when you think about it, that's a very frightening answer. Because that's a mile and 100 miles away from this little sparkly thing for children. The real fairies are much more ordinary. And that's what makes them, as I'd say, frightening. I remember how many stories of people passing fairy forts at night, and somebody comes out of the field and joins them and walks with them a certain part of the road, and then gone. Never a word spoken. But, they're too frightened to say a word. But they know, because this has been seen before. And they continue on their journey, and nothing they can do about it. Their only solution to that is take holy water with them. And many of them did, because the fairies had 7 fears. Something holy, something dirty, they're very clean, something red, the colour of blood, because they have no blood in them. That's one of the things that makes them different from us. Iron or steel, black-handled knife was the best thing that you could have on you. Salt, fire, and if you have none of those things, run forth. You'll never outrun them though, but if you can get as far as flowing water, if you can cross a stream, you're safe. They can't cross flowing water.
Back home in England, we've lost touch with a lot of our folklore. For most people, there isn't really a place for magic or fairies anymore. Ireland, though, has held on to this part of its heritage. So why, when it's so close to England, have these stories and beliefs lived on in Ireland? Well, there are 2 main reasons. And the first is this.
Ireland didn't have this First World War, which did, to a large extent, wipe out a whole generation of young men. Think of the casualties among young men in England, in Germany, in France. Ireland didn't have that, because there was no conscription in Ireland. When you think of the Battle of the Somme, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, there was something like 40,000 British soldiers killed in one day. And that battle, it went on for 6 months. The mincing machine it was called. It was insane. But all you have to do is read Robert Graves's Goodbye to All of That, and you'll see the conditions. You'll see the terrible discipline. You'll see the draft after draft after draft of fellas coming up to be killed, and the inevitability of them being killed was the senselessness of it all. And you pity the ordinary English fella who had to put up with that shit. The Irish never suffered that. You see, you had Irish people Irish young men who became Irish middle-aged men, who became Irish older men.
886,000 British soldiers were killed in World War I, and of those that made it home, many were injured or so psychologically traumatised that they were never the same again. While Irish soldiers did fight, they were all volunteers, because there was no conscription in Ireland, so it didn't suffer those kind of losses. In England, the trauma of the war interrupted the flow of stories from generation to generation. The second reason, industrialisation. You see, Ireland didn't really have an industrial revolution, at least in the same way as England. They say that Irish society jumped from the 19th to the 21st century. In England, the Industrial Revolution saw sweeping changes in people's lives. Old wisdom and traditional livelihoods clashed with new technology and urbanisation as more and more people moved to cities. The old ways of life, where folklore was born, were in decline. But in Ireland, this all happened much later, and because it happened later, it also happened quicker. It wasn't until the 1990s that Ireland's development began to catch up with other European countries. This period saw such dramatic changes in Ireland that they called it the Celtic Tiger. It was a clash of worlds, where rapid development met deeply rooted, age-old beliefs. To put it simply, Irish folklore was exposed to these rapid shifts in society for less time, and so has been able to hang on through those changes until today. In one of the ultimate showdowns between tradition and modernisation, there was a fairy bush. In Ireland, they're sometimes known as lone whitethorn bushes, but you know them as hawthorn. In 1999, this particular bush was in an unfortunate position, right in the path of a planned motorway. Construction had started and the motorway grew longer and longer, and it wasn't long before the planners set their sights on the whitethorn bush. They were preparing to tear it up. Out with the old, in with the new. When Eddie heard what was about to happen, he grabbed a pen and paper and began to write. If they bulldoze the bush to make way for a planned highway pass, the fairies will come, to curse the road and all who use it, to make brakes fail and cars crash, to wreak the kind of mischief fairies are famous for when they're angry.
The one down there in Latoon, the fairy bush, that we had all the bother about in the road building. A while after, some idiot came of a night and cut every single branch off it with a chainsaw. A short time afterwards, one of the local old men said to me, I wonder what'll happen to him. It was the way the old man said it to me. I wonder what'll happen. He was in no doubt that he wouldn't get away with it. I don't know what happened, but I wouldn't be in any doubt that you don't do what he did and come to any good ending. Now, the good end for the bush was it came back, and in fact he only pruned it, you might say. He didn't do it any harm in that sense. So maybe he did himself some harm though.
Fortunately for the bush, Eddie was persuasive, and his warnings were heard. The motorway was diverted just slightly, and the fairy bush continues to thrive there to this day. So while superstitions in Ireland might not be as blatant as someone telling you, I believe in fairies, ask someone to take an axe and chop down a fairy bush, and a lot of people will feel uneasy. We're just making our way through Connemara now, and
I've been thinking, like, we've heard a lot about Irish folklore and things. I'm not a superstitious person at all, but you can really see how this kind of landscape has generated so many myths and legends and so much folklore, because it is really enchanting, and especially in the clouds it looks kind of mysterious and otherworldly and stuff, and it's just so beautiful.
Ireland is a land of contrast. We were cycling through a very modern nation with motorways and high-rises, but still felt the pull of ancient folklore on society here. We saw it in people's hesitance to disturb fairy sites, in the tiny glimmer of truth in their eyes when they joked about being wary of the fairies, and in Ireland's wishing trees, draped in rags and charms placed by people in the hope that it will bring them good luck. Seeing all this left me feeling somehow nostalgic for something I'd never experienced. A sense of loss of something I'd never known. Because that close connection to folklore back at home isn't there anymore. So as we rolled through the Irish landscape, I allowed myself to be whisked away by tales of fairies and magic. I couldn't get too lost in the stories though. We had to press on. Shetland, Skerries and the Schoolhouse Cinema were still a long way off. And winter was on the horizon.